Joining me on News Hour Direct, Sanjeev Sanyal. You are in the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, but I also know you and your interests in history because you've written several books on history. Today, the raging debate in India, or should I say Bharat, is whether the name is being changed from India to Bharat. Is there consultation that is required? Is there a policy change? Will this mean that our passports will change? All kinds of speculation in the ether. How do you look at the new nomenclature that has been adopted by the government, President of Bharat, Prime Minister of Bharat? Do you think this is really a name change, or do you think this is owning up our ancient civilizational existence?
So first of all, I don't know what the fuss is about. Very frankly, both the names have been used for a long time. And our constitution begins by saying India, that is Bharat. Both the names are there. You can choose which one you want. And in Indian languages, we basically use Bharat. In English, we tended to use India, but there's no particular reason why we can't use Bharat, because after all, even the English version of the Constitution also says India, that is Bharat. So I personally think, one can use both, and there is no reason why we should make a big fuss about this.
But then why do you think there is a fuss? In fact, I know you're not a politician, but there's virtually a split down the middle because a new alliance of opposition parties have, really come up, and they have called themselves the India Alliance, and therefore they say that the ruling dispensation has decided to go in for Bharat, just not to allow the opposition alliance to own up brand India. How do you see this?
Well, that you need to ask the politicians. But what I can tell you sociologically, the issue is the following. There was an English-speaking old elite of this country that unfortunately was misreading the constitution as reading India, that was Bharat. All that has happened is that they have discovered that the constitution says India, that is Bharat.
So who had forgotten that India is Bharat, and who was making the mistake of making it India, that was Bharat?
I think there was a small, as I said, English-speaking elite that had kind of drifted into that thinking, and this comes with a whole culture around it. My personal view is that both of these names have a very old history, and it's an interesting history, and incidentally they have both the same origin from the Vedic times. So my own view is that you can use both. Bharat is of course the more valid in Indian languages, but the name India, although foreign, does also have its origins in a Vedic term.
So,
and I'm quite happy to tell you the history if you wish.
Absolutely. So why is Bharat different, and you say more appropriate than India? Many people say India name came up in 1833 when the British really brought in the governor of Bengal and called him the governor of India. What are the antecedents, and which do you think is more appropriate?
Well, both the names are very old. So let me tell you the history. So first of all, the name Bharat has two origins, but there's a Puranic story about a King Bharat, King Bharat, and there is a much older story about an ancient tribe in the Vedic period, in the Bronze Age, called the Bharata tribe, or also called the Trutsu tribe. Let me tell you the story about the Bharata Trutsu tribe, and then I will show you how it's linked to the word India. So what happens in the Bronze Age, in the Rig Veda, it mentions that there is this tribe called the Bharatas, also called the Trutsus, who live in what is now Haryana. And they call their homeland the land of seven rivers, or the Sapta Sindhu. This is basically the Saraswati and its tributaries. It doesn't include the rivers of Punjab and other rivers you may think. There's just a very small area, Saraswati and its tributaries. Now what happens is that they get attacked by a coalition of 10 tribes from the west. And so the chieftain of the Bharata, Sudas, and the guru, Vasishtha, lead a campaign westward, and there is a great battle on the banks of the Parushni, which we now know as the Ravi, where the Bharatas completely crush the alliance of 10 kings. When this, in fact, there's a description of how the fleeing soldiers of the 10 kings get drowned in the Ravi as they're trying to run away. Anyway, having won this battle, they then turn eastward and defeat a chieftain called Bheda on the banks of the Yamuna. So as a result of which, the Bharata tribe ends up creating India's first empire. And the chief, Raja Sudas, then does the first Ashwamedha Yajna, by virtue of which he gets crowned as the Chakravarti. And his symbol is the chakra, the wheel, which, by the way, the Mauryan version of which is now in our national flag. Now, then the Bharatas do something quite unique. You see, typically what happened, tribe wins over other tribes, it forces those tribes to worship their gods. Instead, what the Bharatas do is that they invite all the defeated tribes, and in fact even the tribes they hadn't defeated but happened to be in touch with, and they then compile all the hymns, the knowledge and so on of all these tribes into the texts that we now know as the Vedas. And then they say that far from imposing our ideas on you, what we will do is we will create a space for all the gods of all the tribes around the sacrificial fire. In fact, the last chant of the Rig Veda is about this, about how the sacrificial fire has a space for all the tribes and their gods around it. So this was an idea of assimilation as opposed to imposition that then gets spreads over time and then ends up spreading across India. So what happens is that this idea of Bharata, which came from a small Haryanavi tribe, this becomes a civilization, and people across the subcontinent accept this. So we all come, I'm from Bengal, I come from 2,000 kilometers to the east, but my forefathers at some point accepted this idea of Bharatiya, therefore I call myself a Bharatiya, and I'm not Haryanavi. So that's how I have ended up being a part of the civilization. Now, what happens is that the idea of 7 rivers also spreads. So the original 7 rivers were just the tributaries of the Saraswati. But later on you find the 7 rivers are described in many other texts, etc. And it includes not just the Saraswati, but also the Ganga, the Yamuna, the Sindhu, which is the Indus, the Godavari, Narmada, Kaveri, and so on. And so therefore now you can see that the whole idea of the Bharata tribe has now become a civilizational idea across the entire subcontinent. So Sapta Sindhu is also another name that is used for this landscape. Now foreigners know this, so they also called us Sapta Sindhu. And the earliest reference to India in a text outside of India, which clearly mentions this, is the Avestan texts of the ancient Persians, where the term Sapta Sindhu is written as Hapta Hindu, because there is a phonetic shift from Sir to Her, which by the way also exists in modern Assamese. So Saraswati becomes Harahwati, and what happens is that Sapta Sindhu becomes Hapta Hindu. So one important thing to remember, that the word Hindu is first not there in its own right by itself, but together with the idea of the 7 rivers, Hapta Hindu. Now, Hindu then becomes the generic term used for Indians, and it then travels westward and becomes India by the time you end up with the Greeks and other Europeans and people in the Mediterranean. So this is how that term exists. The term India is indeed foreign, but its origins are in the Sapta Sindhu, and the term basically the Bharatas called their homeland.
Well, so Sanjeev Sanyal, let me ask you, you've given a fascinating historical reference where both coexisted. But today, objections are being raised on the ground of Hindi and English, and is this a backdoor emphasis on Hindi being foisted on southern states, for example, by referring to India as Bharat. How do you respond to the language debate that also creeps into this?
This is entirely pointless. In every Indian language, including the southern ones, the term Bharata is used as the name by which we know our country, Bharat, Bharatvarsha, and various combinations thereof. The Puranas clearly mention the people who live south of the Himalayas and north of the ocean are the people of Bharata, or the descendants of Bharata. I'm a Bengali, I'm not Hindi speaking. In my country, Bharat Barsho is a commonly used. In fact, by the way, the national anthem, which is written in Bengali, also mentions Bharat. So this is a commonly used term. If you look at the Tamils, who is one of the greatest Tamil poets, it's Subramania Bharati. So, you know, this is widely used. I have no idea how this debate even exists. Now, yes, it is true in European languages, the word India is used, but I don't see what the big deal is also of using Bharat. After all, many countries in the world have dual names, Great Britain and the United Kingdom, Holland and Netherlands, Japan and Nippon, and so on and so forth. So you can interchangeably use both. I think the problem really is that the use of Bharata is being introduced into the English language. Now, I don't know why we should be the custodians of purity in the English language.
So you think it's just about the English language that we're using Bharat now, or do you think it is an ethos and therefore
absolutely,
the ethos of India and sublime at the sublime level somewhere or the other, there is a messaging in this as well, coming back to modern era and not historical perspective. Is this really brand positioning?
Well, if you are trying to make it in terms of the political debate, I have no particular interest in it. My interest here is purely as a scholar, and I'm just telling you that the word Bharata is the common word that Indians have used for themselves for a very long time. And as I mentioned, there's a Vedic context to it, but even later on in the Puranic texts also this thing is mentioned. I mentioned to you how all the Puranas also have, the people who live south of the Himalayas and north of the oceans are called the Bharatas. There is, of course, a somewhat different origin story about it, about a king called Bharata, who was the grandson of Rishabha and the son of another great king called Nabhi, and so on. So there is another origin story, but point of the matter is even that is very, very old. It goes back to the Iron Age. So whichever way you prefer, fact of the matter is these are well established in Sanskrit, Vedic texts, Puranic texts, even in Jain texts, it's there even in Buddhist texts, and across the country.
Well, let me ask you sociologically, do you think it matters to the people of India? Because politically, whatever the issue may be, do you think people of India have a association with the term Bharat? And are there any generational attachments to Bharat versus India?
I don't know about generational, but it certainly is the case that, the term Bharata is a much more evocative term because after all we say Bharat Mata Ki Jai, we don't say India Mata Ki Jai. So when it comes to evocative things, the idea of Bharat or Bhavani Bharati, after all, when we, Vande Mataram, when we are bowing, to which mother are we bowing? We are Bhavani Bharati. So this idea of Bharata is a very old one, which is very evocative. And so, yes, at some more civilizational, visceral level, most Indians associate with it more closely. That doesn't mean that, we have some hatred against the word India. We also use it. I use it commonly in my writings and so on, and I think that will continue. I really do not understand what this debate is about.
Well, the debate is about the fact that suddenly from President of India, it becomes the president of Bharat. And therefore, questions are being raised that is the government now going back? Will Digital India become Digital Bharat? Will Startup India become Startup Bharat? All kinds of memes and all kinds of connotations are being made. Do you think it's a facile debate, or do you think there's substance?
There's a pointless debate in my view, and perhaps only pertinent to a very small proportion of India's sort of Lutyens, Delhi, and a few other South Bombay crowd. Most Indians call country Bharat. We also accept the word India as useful. Like, for example, if you had to have bricks, the I in it would be needed in order for it to be used, because you need a vowel in there. And if somebody wants to continue using India in there in order to be able to pronounce bricks, then you should continue with it. We're hardly going to say we're going to have an unpronounceable as the term to use instead of bricks, right?
Yes,
So I don't think that is an issue. I really do not think this should become a political issue at all.
I wish politicians could see the pointlessness of this debate. But let me also ask you, what does Sanatan Dharma stand for you? And do you think in recent times, people, again, I would say in certain parts of the country, in certain walks of life, especially in political walks of life, have one way or the other tried to slander Sanatan Dharma?
Certainly it has been fashionable amongst certain colonial influenced narratives. But Sanatan Dharma also is a very old term. It basically means the eternal tradition of Dharma. And it has been used for a long, long time, and many people have slandered it for a long, long time. Whether it's Turkic invaders or Portuguese marauders trying to do the Goa Inquisition, and we have gone through a lot over hundreds of years, but we have survived, and we have every intention of flourishing.
Do you think like some people say that this is a disease that should be eradicated, like dengue or malaria? Do you think this is something to do with the Dravidian thought and their views on the Brahmanical way Sanatan Dharma was looked at?
See, this is one of the strange things. Somehow Dravidian, or specifically Tamil identity, has come to be shown as being in conflict with some kind of Brahmanical patriarchy or something like that. But in fact, let me tell you, the very first enunciation of Tamil identity happens in a Sangam era grammar called the Tolpakiyam. Now, if you read the preface of the Tolpakiyam, then it clearly states that we, the Tamil people, are the people who live between Kumari in the south, which is Kanyakumari, and the Venkata Hills in the north. Now, that is oddly thousands of years later, still roughly speaking, Tamil Nadu of today. Now, in that preface, in the same preface, just a few lines later, it states that this identity as Tamils is derived from the 4 Vedas. Now, there is no way of getting around it because very, very clearly written. This is the most ancient Tamil text in existence, and this is what it starts by saying, that the Tamil identity derives from the 4 Vedas. Now, you get around it however you wish. You can read the Tolpakiyam yourself. It's, by the way, right behind me. I can pull it out if you wish and show it to you. And, I have, in many conferences, I have got well-known scholars to chant it out, to verify it. And so far, nobody has come back with any objection.
I also want to ask you, Sanjeev Sanyal, the G20 summit. Do you think this is the display of India's combination of soft and hard economic power? How do you see it?
Well, it just happens to be that we are hosting the G20 at a particular time in history. After the 3 COVID-impacted G20 presidencies, we are fortunate that we were able to host this in the first fully open year. And it happens to be that it also coincides with a particular turn in our own history when, at multiple fields, whether it's in the field of economics as emerging economic power, or in terms of an emerging geopolitical power, our stature in the field of science, the moon landing, or even improved sporting performance. The point is, it's very clear to anybody, any Indian living at this time, that we are at a certain point of emergence. And, to be able to host the G20 in the way we are doing it, which is also, by the way, quite different. We have made a much bigger deal of the G20 presidency than other presidency had in terms of, the sheer variety of events, the wide scale of its spread, the 18,000 people who attended, the 60 locations. We have done it in a much grander style than usually G20 used to be done. So in a sense, this is, yes, it's a matter of projection, and yes, as an emerging power, we should be willing to do some soft power projection, no doubt about it.
And
there's no reason to be apologetic about it at all.
What do you think about the economic situation in the country? Inflation, challenging for many, and again, criticism coming in that all this use of one nation, one poll, or change of usage from India to Bharat. These are all diversionary tactics, trying to take away from the real questions that are facing on the economic front our country, which is inflation, lack of jobs, as well as the fact that and this has been stated by former Finance Minister Mr. P. Chidambaram. The 10 years of UPA posted an average rate of growth at 7.5%. We are way less than that, 5.7% in the almost 10 years of the Modi government.
Well, I don't want to get into the politics of it, but you do realize you have to include the 2 COVID years in there. And so, of course, any government that had to face the COVID period would get a lower statistical average. That goes without saying. So what? The fact of the matter is difficult times were dealt with, and rather well. And I think almost everybody will agree that India came out rather strong from it. So as far as growth is concerned, we have just registered in the first quarter 7.7. And sure, there's a statistical bump there. But there is also the case that, for the year as a whole, we'll end up with something a little lower than 7% for the financial year, which, by the way, is by far the fastest growing economy in the world. And we are sustaining this year after year. It's not just this happens to be in 1 year. We have emerged now as the world's 5th largest economy in dollar terms. We are already the 3rd largest in PPP terms. And, in 18 months' time, we'll go past Germany. In about 3-4 years' time, we will go past Japan to become the world's 3rd largest economy. I don't think these are trivial things, that they matter, and clearly the rest of the world is noticing. And as far as inflation is concerned, even there, we have done very, very well. You had this massive spike in inflation in virtually every other country. And we, despite being heavily dependent on imported oil, we managed that inflationary phase very, very well. We have had a recent spike in vegetable prices, you're right, in tomato prices, which, by the way, have already come down. They had spiked up to 150 rupees per kg or thereabouts. I'm told they are now back to somewhere in the range of 30 rupees per kg. I don't think, that is to be counted as, sustained inflation, and it's already unwound. So I don't think there is underlying inflation. In fact, wholesale price indexes are in negative territory. So if anything, the underlying trends suggest deflation in certain parts of the economy. And people are complaining about that in those sectors. So inflation is not really an issue. The external sector, despite global slowdown in exports, is also in decent shape. The current account is well managed. Foreign exchange reserves are at $600 billion, which matches our external debt. And as we already discussed, growth is the highest in the world. What else do you expect? Now, of course, it it would be wonderful if the rest of the world wasn't going into recession. If they were growing as well, our growth rate was easily go up to over 8%. The infrastructure we have built in recent years, the reforms we have done, our supply side is very capable of doing 8% growth rate. Can't do it right now because, as I said, we can't do the level of exports we would like to do. But the time will come, and we will grow at over 8% as soon as the rest of the world begins to grow again. And at that time, we will sustain those 8%, even at 9% growth rate. As I said, the machinery now is in place to sustain those types of growth rates over long periods of time.
Well, can't find fault with your bullishness for India, but thank you very much, Dr. Sanjeev Sanyal, for speaking with me and for setting the record straight, whether it is our civilizational history or it is our current economic status. Thank you very much.